It started on a night when the city seemed to have forgotten kindness. Rain pelted the sidewalks in heavy sheets, the kind that makes even neon lights look tired. Pedestrians hurried by with umbrellas tilted like shields, heads bowed, eyes fixed on nothing but escape. On the corner of 7th and Pine, a girl crouched beside a drainage grate. She was no older than 12, dressed in a coat too thin for the season, her shoes soaked through. People called children like her street kids, as if that were their only name. But she had one, whispered only to herself, Lila. She was searching for something the rain might have washed away. A crust of bread, a forgotten coin, anything to quiet the hollow in her stomach. That was when she saw it. A glimmer, not the dull shine of a bottle cap, not the glassy sparkle of a soda tab. This was different, real, insistent, like a tiny lighthouse calling her through the storm. She reached her hand into the iron bars of the gutter, her fingers scraping cold metal. The water stung, rushing fast, trying to carry the object away. With a desperate pinch, she caught it before it disappeared. When she drew her hand back, the rainlight caught on gold. A ring. Not just any ring, but one heavy with memory, its stone deep and trembling like the last tear in a widow's eye. Lila stared. For a girl who had nothing, here was everything. Enough money perhaps to eat for weeks, enough to pawn and never sleep on cardboard again. And yet, as thunder rumbled overhead, another voice rose in her. It isn't yours. She closed her small fist around it, pressing it to her chest. Someone lost this, she whispered, though no one listened. Someone will be looking. Around her, the city moved on. Cars splashing through puddles, men and women racing to warmth. No one noticed the girl by the gutter who had just chosen honesty over hunger. But in that choice, the story began. She didn't sleep that night. The rain kept hammering the awnings above her, and every time she opened her palm to stare at the ring, her mind raced with questions. Who owned it? Why was it here, in the gutter, discarded like nothing? Morning broke gray and damp. The city smelled of wet pavement and burnt coffee, drifting from street vendors. Lila tucked the ring deep into her pocket and walked with a kind of secret weight, as if the little circle of gold had made her taller. There was only one place she could think to go, the pawn shop on 8th Avenue. Everyone on the street knew Mr. Keller. He was gruff, tight-fisted, and suspicious of everyone, but he had eyes sharper than any jeweler's glass. If anyone could tell her where the ring came from, it would be him. The bell above the shop door jingled as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of dust and iron hung heavy. Shelves sagged with tarnished trophies, cracked guitars, watches that had long stopped ticking. Behind the counter sat Keller himself, a man with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, polishing his glasses with a rag that never looked clean. "What?" he barked, not even glancing up. Lila swallowed and placed the ring carefully on the glass. I found this." That got his attention. His head jerked up, eyes narrowing. He set the glasses aside, leaned close, and for a moment said nothing at all. His thick fingers lifted the ring as though it were fragile, sacred even. He turned it under the light, muttering, "Solid gold, diamond cut, hand engraving." His lips pressed together. "This isn't trinket trash. Where'd you steal it?" "I didn't," Lila cried, too loud for the quiet shop. "It was in the gutter." I swear, Keller's eyes searched her face for cracks, for lies. He had seen plenty of kids try to pass stolen goods, but this girl, thin, trembling, drenched in honesty, was different. He studied the ring again. Inside, faint but still legible, were the letters MC. He grunted, "You know whose this is?" Lila shook her head. "Clarice Morgan." He spat the name like everyone should know it. Richest divorcee in the city, mansion up on West Hill. Her pictures in the papers every other week. He set the ring back down, but his hand lingered. How the hell it ended up in a sewer, only God knows. Lila stared at the band, her heart thudding. A billionaire's ring. She imagined a woman in silk gowns, tall gates, cameras flashing. She couldn't belong further from that world if she tried. Can you tell her? Lila asked timidly. Give it back? Keller snorted. Lady like that doesn't answer to pawn shops. She's got lawyers, guards, fences high as heaven. He paused, squinting at her. But she might answer to a girl like you. No one suspects the gutter child carrying their treasure. Lila frowned, unsure if it was a warning or a dare, but she closed her hand around the ring again. Somehow, she knew the task was hers. Outside, the city roared awake, and somewhere beyond the traffic and the towers, a woman named Clarice Morgan sat in her mansion, unaware that a child was walking toward her with the one thing she thought she had thrown away forever. By the time Lila reached West Hill, the sun had climbed, sharp and unforgiving. The neighborhood was unlike anywhere she had ever walked. Iron gates curved high, gardens trimmed with military precision, fountains spilling clear water while only blocks away children cupped their hands under leaking hydrants. Clarice Morgan's mansion stood tallest of them all, white stone glass panes glinting like ice. A pair of guards in dark suits stood by the gate, earpieces glimmering like tiny thorns. Lila's throat went dry. She pressed the ring in her fist so tightly it left a mark. Then she stepped forward. The guard stopped her before she even touched the iron bars. "Move along," one said. His voice was flat, trained. "I need to see her," Lila whispered. The other laughed. "Kids like you don't see people like her." Out Lila's eyes burned, but she didn't move. "I have something that belongs to her." She opened her hand just enough for the light to catch the ring. For the first time, their expression shifted. They glanced at each other, then at her, and without a word pressed a button. The gates clicked open just wide enough for a child to slip through. The mansion's doors opened before she could lift her head. And there she was, Clarice Morgan. Her presence filled the doorway like a storm. She was tall, draped in silk the color of midnight. Her hair swept back to reveal cheekbones carved by years of battles both won and lost. Her eyes, cold and exacting, scanned the girl before her as if Lila were no more than a trespasser. "What is this?" Clarice's voice was smooth but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Lila stepped forward, her hands trembling. She held out the ring. It fell into the gutter. "I found it." For a moment, something flickered across Clarice's face, recognition or maybe pain, but it vanished quickly, replaced by suspicion. She took the ring from Lila's palm, examined it under the sunlight, then looked down at the child with narrowed eyes. "And why?" she asked slowly. "Should I believe you didn't stage this? Little girls have clever tricks. Return a jewel, earn a reward. Is that it? A con?" Lila's chest tightened. "No, I don't want money. I just wanted to..." Clarice raised a hand, silencing her. The ring glinted between her fingers, heavy with more than gold. Her voice cooled further. "Nothing in this city comes for free. Remember that." The doors shut behind her like a verdict. Lila stood alone on the marble steps, the echo of that voice still stinging her ears. For the first time since she'd found the ring, she wondered if honesty was worth it at all. Lila walked back down the marble steps, her small frame swallowed by the gates closing behind her. The guard said nothing. The city stretched out again, loud and merciless, and she drifted toward it like a leaf tossed in the wind. She ended up at the corner store across from the mansion, the kind that smelled of burnt coffee and overripe bananas. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass of the soda fridge, trying to steady the knot in her chest. "Kid." The voice came from behind the counter. A man in his 50s with a face worn like old leather pointed at her. His name tag read Miguel, and his eyes were kinder than most. "That lady throw you out?" Lila nodded, biting her lip. Miguel sighed, reaching under the counter. "I seen you last night." Her head snapped up. "What?" He turned a small monitor toward her. A grainy camera feed played, street view of the gutter outside his shop. Through the static blur, there she was, a little girl, crouched in the rain, struggling to pull something from the grate. The camera caught it clearly, the gleam of the ring in her hand, the way she clutched it to her chest before disappearing into the storm. "You're telling the truth," Miguel said quietly. "That's all I needed to know." Lila stared at the screen, her throat tightening. Proof. Finally. Proof. Miguel copied the footage onto a small drive and slipped it into her palm. "Take it back. Don't let anyone call you a liar." For the first time since finding the ring, she smiled. Not wide, not carefree, but enough to remind her what hope felt like. That afternoon she returned to West Hill. The guards frowned at the sight of her again, but when she held up the drive, her voice daisy. They hesitated. "I have something she needs to see," Lila said. Inside, Clarice Morgan sat alone in a high-ceilinged parlor, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. The ring lay on the table before her like an accusation she couldn't ignore. When the guards announced the girl's return, she almost sent her away with a wave. Almost. But something in the guard's tone, insistent, made her pause. Lila stepped inside, holding the drive with both hands. Her voice was soft but unshaking. "I didn't lie. There's a video. It shows everything." Clarice's eyes flicked to the device, then to the girl. For the briefest instant, her composure wavered. She gestured. "Show me." The screen lit up with last night's rain, the empty street, and the child who fought the rushing water to save a ring that was never hers. The room grew impossibly quiet. Clarice leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on the tiny figure frozen in the frame. The diamond glinted even through static, and the memory it carried surged like a wound reopening. Her hand trembled as she pressed the pause button. "You should have let it go," she whispered, more to herself than to the girl. "You should have let it wash away." But Lila didn't understand. She only knew that, at last, she was believed. Clarice sat motionless, the paused frame of the video still glowing on the screen. A girl in rags hunched in the rain, clutching the very object Clarice had tried to abandon. Her fingers closed slowly around the ring on the table. She didn't slip it onto her finger. She hadn't in years. But she turned it, over and over, as though it might burn her if she held it too long. Lila shifted on her feet. The parlor was silent, except for the distant ticking of an antique clock. She wanted to speak, to ask for forgiveness, maybe even for thanks. But Clarice's face stopped her. Its sharp angles softened not by kindness but by something heavier, like grief pressed too long against the skin. Finally, Clarice exhaled. The sound was almost a laugh, bitter and quiet. "You know what this is?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "It isn't just gold." Clarice's eyes fixed on the diamond. "It was my mother's. She slipped it onto my finger the day I married. She said it would remind me that love is a covenant stronger than wealth, that a promise means more than all the money in the world." Her mouth twisted. "And then I lived to see how empty promises can be." She stood abruptly, crossing the room to the tall window. Rain streaks from the night before still stained the glass, faint reminders of the storm. She spoke without turning. I wore it for years, even when he stopped coming home, even when the papers printed lies that weren't really lies. After the divorce, I looked at it and saw only my own foolishness. One night, I walked to the balcony, ready to throw it as far as I could. But my hands shook. I couldn't. So I dropped it instead. Somewhere. Anywhere. A gutter, perhaps. I didn't care. Lila's eyes widened. You wanted to lose it? Clarice turned then, her face streaked with no tears, only exhaustion. Yes, because keeping it meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. For the first time, the great Clarisse Morgan didn't look untouchable. She looked like a woman who had carried too many nights alone. Lila swallowed hard. She wanted to say the words that pressed at her chest, that sometimes the things we throw away are the things that still need saving. But she stayed silent. Clarisse slipped the ring back onto the table. Take your video and your truth. You've proved yourself, but listen carefully, child. Not every treasure is meant to be found. The words landed like stone between them. Yet as Lila turned to leave, she noticed Clarisse's hand hover just a second longer over the ring, unwilling to let it go again. The parlor door creaked open before Lila could answer. A tall woman in a gray suit entered, carrying a folder tucked against her chest like a shield. Her heels clicked across the marble floor, measured, efficient, meant to remind everyone of her authority. Mrs. Morgan, she said briskly, the board meeting is in 20 minutes. You'll want to review the contracts before... She stopped when her eyes landed on Lila. Clarisse straightened, as if caught in something unbecoming. This is not the time, Evelyn. The woman's gaze sharpened. Who is she? No one, Clarisse said quickly. Just returning something. But Evelyn had already noticed the ring glinting on the table, the small drive still plugged into the screen, the way Clarisse's shoulders seemed unsettled, her mouth tightened. A street child. In this house, that's reckless. What if the press had seen? Lila flushed, her fists curling at her sides. I didn't come to hurt anyone. I just wanted to give it back. The lawyer's laugh was dry. And what did you expect in return? A handful of cash, a seat at her table. Clarisse's eyes snapped toward her. Enough! The word cracked the air like a whip, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Clarisse, you know the stakes. Your reputation is already under the microscope. After the divorce, after the gossip columns. Do you want headlines about charity cases sneaking past your gates? Lila felt suddenly small again, like she had been reduced to a problem, a scandal in waiting. Her throat ached. She wished she had never stepped foot on the marble steps. But Clarisse hesitated. She looked from the lawyer to the girl, from the ring to the drive. The diamond caught the light again, sharp as truth. Leave us, Clarisse said at last. Evelyn blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. The contracts can wait. Her voice was iron now. Go. The lawyer stiffened, lips pressed into a line, but she obeyed. The door closed harder than it needed to. Silence returned, heavier than before. Clarisse turned back to Lila, and for the first time her tone softened. Not warm, but less distant, like a door opening a crack. You see what happens when honesty crosses into my world, she said. People call it weakness. They call it danger. They call it scandal. Her fingers brushed the ring, absent-mindedly, almost tender. But sometimes it is the only thing left worth believing. Lila stood very still, her heart pounding. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, something fragile and dangerous had begun. a thread between a woman who had everything and a girl who had nothing, bound only by a single act of truth. Clarisse did not send Lila away that evening. Instead, she called for a tray of tea, though the girl's hands were too nervous to touch the porcelain cups. The mansion was quiet, save for the faint hum of air ducts and the shuffle of distant staff trying to stay invisible. Clarisse studied Lila the way one studies a stranger's face in a crowd, searching for hidden motives. Her chin rested lightly on her hand, the ring lying on the table between them like a silent witness. "You claim you don't want money," Clarisse said at last, "that you return this out of honesty." The word seemed to taste foreign on her tongue, but I've lived long enough to know honesty is rarely free. Lila lifted her chin, though her voice trembled. "I didn't ask for anything." "Not yet," Clarisse countered. She leaned back, her silk gown folding like dark water. "So let's test that." She rose from her chair and crossed to a cabinet lined with silver frames and crystal decanters. From the lowest shelf, she drew out a velvet box, then set it gently before the girl. The lid clicked open to reveal a necklace, diamonds strung like frozen stars, catching even the dimmest light. "Take it," Clarisse said simply. Lila blinked. "What?" "Take it. Walk out the door with it. No one will stop you." Clarisse's eyes narrowed, sharp and unblinking. "You could sell it. Eat for a year, maybe longer. Or you could leave it here, untouched." Lila's fingers curled into her palms. Hunger roared in her stomach at the thought. Hot meals, dry beds, safety. She had dreamed of such things, but she shook her head. "It's not mine." Just like the ring wasn't. For a long moment, Clarisse only stared. Then slowly she closed the velvet lid with a soft snap. Something unreadable flickered in her eyes, a mixture of disbelief and, perhaps, the faintest glimmer of respect. "You surprise me," she murmured. The clock struck the hour, its chime echoing through the parlor. Clarisse stood tall again, gathering her composure. "Go, child. I've seen enough for tonight." Lila hesitated. Part of her wanted to stay, to speak, to ask why such treasures brought more sorrow than joy to a woman who had everything. But Clarisse's face had already hardened back into its mask. So the girl left, stepping into the night, the gate closing heavy behind her. Yet Clarisse remained at the window long after, the reflection of her mother's ring glinting faintly on the glass, and the memory of a child who refused to take what wasn't hers lingering stubbornly in her thoughts. The streets welcomed her back the way they always did, with cold air, wet concrete, and the restless hum of a city that didn't know her name. By the time Lila reached the alley she called home, her thin coat was soaked again, and the soles of her shoes squelched with each step. Two boys sat huddled beneath a sagging billboard, their fire made from broken newspapers flickering against the graffiti. When they saw her, they whistled. "Thought you ran off for good," one of them said. His name was Milo, older by a year, but with eyes that had seen too much. "What did you find?" Lila hesitated. She thought of the velvet box, the diamonds catching the light like food she could never taste. She thought of the ring that could have bought her freedom. Then she shook her head. "Nothing." "Not what you're thinking," Milo snorted. "You're lying. No one goes up West Hill for nothing." "I'm not lying," she said firmly, though the hunger gnawing in her stomach made her voice thin. The other boy, Toby, stretched his skinny arms. "Even if she found something, bet she gave it back. That's what makes her stupid." He grinned with missing teeth. "Honesty don't fill bellies." Lila pulled her coat tighter, curling up against the wall. She didn't argue. The words stung because part of her believed them. She could feel her ribs pressing through her skin. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but as the fire crackled low, she closed her eyes and saw Clarice's face again. The way her fingers had hovered over the necklace, the slight tremor when she spoke of her mother's ring. For the first time in a long time, Lila felt like her choice had mattered to someone, maybe not enough to change her life, but enough to prove she wasn't invisible. Later, when the fire burned out and the boys dozed against the billboard, Lila lay awake. She traced the scar the ring had left in her palm from the night she pulled it out of the gutter. A faint circle, almost like it had branded her. "Not mine," she whispered to herself, "but maybe it means something anyway." Above her, the city lights blinked against the dark sky, indifferent to the small girl curled on cardboard. But somewhere up the hill, in a mansion too bright and too lonely, a woman stared at the same night, turning a ring over and over in her hand, remembering the child who chose hunger over theft. And so, two worlds kept circling each other, drawn closer not by wealth or blood, but by a fragile thread of honesty neither of them could quite cut. The Morgan mansion had never been so quiet. The halls were polished, the curtains drawn, the air heavy with the kind of silence money cannot soften. Clarice sat alone in her study, the fire flickering low, though she hadn't noticed the chill. The ring lay on the desk before her, turning slowly between her fingers. She had not slept. Each time she closed her eyes, the image of that girl returned, barefoot, dripping from the rain, holding out the ring as though it were sacred. And then again, the way she refused the necklace, her voice trembling but unshaken. "It's not mine." Clarice lifted her glass of wine, then set it down untouched. She hated when memories crept in without permission. Her mother's voice was the loudest. "A promise, Clarice, is stronger than wealth. Remember that." She pressed the ring against her palm until it left a mark, just as it had left one on the girl's hand. She wondered if Lila felt it too, that invisible circle, like a scar that bound them both. At midnight, Clarice rose. The mirrors in the long hallway reflected her figure back at her, tall, poised, but with shadows under her eyes that no silk gown could hide. She passed the portraits of ancestors she never loved, past the shelves of books she no longer read, and paused at the great window that overlooked the city. Below, the streets stretched endlessly, scattered with people who had never once touched marble floors or crystal chandeliers. And somewhere among them was that child. Evelyn's words from earlier returned. A street child, reckless, dangerous for your reputation. But Clarice felt no danger, only unease, the kind that comes when a truth refuses to be buried. She called for her driver. "Not the limousine," she said quietly. "The town car. No one needs to know. Where shall I take you, ma'am?" She hesitated, admitting it felt like weakness, but she forced the words out. "Downtown, near 8th, find the pawn shop." The driver blinked, but didn't ask questions. Clarice wrapped a scarf around her head, something she had not done since her youth, and slipped into the shadows of the car. For the first time in years, the billionaire widow left West Hill not as a figure of society, but as a woman chasing a question she could no longer ignore. And in the alleys below, a girl stirred from restless sleep, unaware that the world she thought she had left behind was about to come looking for her. The town car slid quietly into the narrow street of 8th Avenue, its black paint too polished for the cracked asphalt it touched. Clarice's driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, uncertain. "Are you sure, ma'am? This isn't—" "Just stop," she said. She stepped out into the night air. The street was alive with a different kind of wealth. Neon lights buzzing, laughter spilling from bars, hawkers shouting over the hiss of food carts. Yet beneath it all lingered the sour smell of garbage, the shuffle of those who had nowhere to go. The pawn shop bell jingled as she entered. The dim light revealed shelves sagging with the forgotten, chipped china, dented saxophones, watches that had lost their tick. Behind the counter sat Keller, his glasses sliding down his nose, a man who had long since given up on politeness. He looked up, startled. Well, if it isn't Clarice Morgan! My. What brings the queen to my little kingdom? I'm looking for a girl, Clarice said, her voice clipped. Keller chuckled. That narrows it down. She came here yesterday. Small, thin, dark hair. She brought you something. Clarice's gaze swept the room, as though the walls themselves might answer. Keller's smirk faded. He set his rag down slowly. Ah, that one. Clarice's chest tightened. You know her? I know she's honest, Keller said. He leaned across the counter. Found your ring in the gutter. Marched it right in here instead of pawning it for bread. Do you know how rare that is in this part of town? Clarice said nothing. Her throat was tight. Keller went on. Name's Lila. Sleeps where she can. Comes around when she's desperate, not when she's scheming. There's a difference. Clarice lowered her eyes to the scratched counter. The diamond on her ring caught the light, flashing once like a signal. She whispered, almost to herself, why would she give it back? Because some kids still believe in things money can't buy, Keller said gruffly. And maybe because she's still hoping someone believes in her. For a long moment, Clarice stood very still, her gloved hands resting against the glass. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, but inside, something in her began to stir, an ache she had taught herself to bury long ago. Where can I find her? She asked at last. Keller hesitated. He scratched his chin, studied her face. Find her, or fix her. There's a difference there, too. Clarice met his gaze, and for once her mask slipped. Just tell me. Keller sighed. He scribbled an address on the back of a receipt and slid it across the counter. Under the old billboard on 9th. But be careful, lady. That world doesn't forgive easily, and it doesn't trust easily either. Clarice pocketed the slip, turned on her heel, and stepped back into the night. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking toward wealth, but into the heart of poverty. And for reasons she could not yet explain, it terrified her less than staying in her mansion ever had. The billboard loomed above like a tired giant, its paint peeling. The smiling face of an old soda ad faded into something ghostly. Beneath it, 3 children huddled in the shadows, their breaths rising in small clouds against the cold. Clarice's heels clicked softly as she stepped closer, out of place in every way. Her scarf covered most of her face, but even wrapped in modest clothes, she carried herself like someone the world had taught to be seen. One of the boys stirred first, eyes sharp even in sleep. He nudged the other. Both sat up quickly, ready to run. Easy, Clarice said quietly. Her voice carried no threat, but the boys still bristled like cornered dogs. And then Lila stirred. She blinked against the dim streetlight, saw the figure standing there, and froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she was dreaming. The woman from the mansion, here among cardboard and broken bottles. You, Lila whispered. Clarice stepped closer, her breath catching, as she saw the girl's thin blanket, the bruised skin on her knees, the defiant way she tried to sit taller despite the cold. You gave me back something I tried to lose, Clarice said softly, and I don't know why I can't stop thinking about it. Milo, the older boy, cut in. She doesn't need you. We don't need your charity. His voice was sharp, protective. Clarissa's eyes flicked toward him, then back to Lila. I didn't come with money. Not tonight. Her hand tightened on the scarf at her neck. I came with questions. And maybe, she faltered, the word tasting strange, maybe gratitude. Lila studied her, searching for mockery, for the chill she had felt in the mansion. But there was something different now. The sharp edges in Clarissa's voice had dulled. You thought I lied, Lila said. Yes, Clarice admitted, because in my world, people lie more often than they breathe. And now? Clarice held her gaze. Now I'm wondering if I've been living in the wrong world. The boys shifted uncomfortably, sensing something they couldn't name. Lila's throat tightened, though she didn't know why. Clarice lowered herself slowly, deliberately, until she was sitting on the cold concrete beside them, her silk scarf brushing the dirt. The sight made Milo's mouth drop open. For the first time in years, Clarice Morgan sat, not on marble but on pavement. And for the first time in Lila's short life, an adult looked at her not as a thief, not as a nuisance, but as if her honesty had value. The city rumbled on around them, indifferent. But under that billboard, something small and unspoken began to take root, something neither of them had expected: trust. The wind whistled through the broken frame of the billboard, rattling loose paper like ghostly applause. Clarice drew her scarf tighter, though the chill biting at her had little to do with the night air. Come with me, she said suddenly. The boys blinked. Milo barked a laugh. To your palace? No way. Clarice's gaze never left Lila. One night, that's all I'm offering. A warm bed, food that isn't from a trash bin. Her tone sharpened, almost defensive, but under one condition. You speak of it to no one, not the press, not your friends, not even to yourself when you wake up. Do you understand? Lila hesitated. Her stomach tightened at the thought of real food, a blanket that didn't smell of mildew. Yet her eyes darted to Milo and Toby. Leaving them felt like betrayal. They won't let me in, she said quietly. Not someone like me. Clarice's voice softened. Then consider it a test. For both of us. Milo scowled, but said nothing. Toby's wide eyes glistened with envy. Lila looked down at her scarred palms, then back at the woman who had once shut a door in her face and was now, strangely, opening another. All right, she whispered. The ride back to West Hill was silent, except for the low hum of the car. Lila pressed her forehead to the window, watching the streets melt into boulevards, alleys vanish into avenues. The city changed costume as they climbed, grime giving way to gleaming glass, shadows replaced by manicured lamps. When the gates opened, Lila's breath caught. She had never seen such light spill from a single house. Chandeliers glowed through tall windows, casting gold across marble steps that stretched wider than the billboard she'd left behind. The guards stiffened when they saw her. Clarice's tone cut through their doubt. She is with me. Inside, the mansion seemed to swallow her whole. Every surface gleamed. Every corner whispered of money. Lila hugged herself tightly, her worn coat out of place among the velvet drapes and polished silver. Clarice watched her from the stairway. Remember what I said, she warned. This is not a gift. It is not charity. It is a trial. You will eat, you will sleep, and in the morning you will leave. And what passes between us tonight stays in this house. Lila nodded, though her heart fluttered with questions she dared not ask. A maid appeared, carrying a tray heavy with food. Steam rose from roasted chicken, bread soft enough to melt at a touch, fruit gleaming like jewels. Lila's hands shook as she reached for it, then stopped, glancing at Clarice as if asking permission. Eat, Clarice said, her eyes unreadable. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Lila tasted more than survival. She tasted warmth, possibility, and something else she could not yet name, the beginning of belonging. The mansion slept in silence, its corridors hushed, as if the walls themselves feared to wake. Lila lay in a bed too soft to be real, her body swallowed by blankets that smelled faintly of lavender, but sleep would not come. Her mind kept circling back to the velvet dining table, the chandelier that dripped light like stars, the woman who had watched her eat without tasting a bite herself. Near dawn, a knock startled her. The door creaked open. Clarisse stood there, wrapped in a pale shawl, her eyes shadowed from another sleepless night. "Come," she said. Lila rose, padding barefoot across the polished floor, and followed her through winding halls. They passed closed doors and silent portraits until Clarisse stopped before a pair of tall oak doors. With a slow push, they opened into a smaller, more intimate chamber. It was nothing like the grand rooms Lila had seen. No velvet, no glittering chandeliers. Instead, the space was lined with old books, faded curtains, and a single cabinet of framed photographs. Clarisse stepped inside first, her hand brushing across one frame. She lifted it carefully and held it out. This was my mother. The photograph showed a woman with kind eyes, her hair pinned neatly, her smile warm but dignified. On her hand glinted the same ring Lila had pulled from the gutter. "She gave it to me on my wedding day," Clarisse whispered. "She told me love was a promise, that I should never let go of it no matter what storms came. She died believing I would be happy." Her voice faltered. She set the picture back gently, as though afraid to bruise it. "When the marriage collapsed, when the papers printed his betrayals, I looked at this ring and felt her voice mocking me. I wanted to believe she had been right, but all I felt was the weight of a lie." Lila stood quietly, her fingers twisting at the hem of her nightshirt. "That's why you tried to lose it," she said softly. Clarisse's eyes glistened. "Yes, I thought if I let it go, I could let the pain go with it. But you—" She turned, studying the girl. "You pulled it back from the gutter as if it still mattered. As if promises could still be redeemed." Lila swallowed, her own voice fragile. "Maybe it wasn't just a ring. Maybe it was waiting for someone to prove it still meant something." For a long moment, Clarisse said nothing. Then she lowered herself into a chair, her shoulders heavy, her poise stripped away. "No one in my world talks like that," she murmured. "Not anymore." The dawn light crept through the curtains, soft and golden, touching both woman and girl. In that quiet room, surrounded by memories of a love that once was, Clarisse let a stranger from the streets sit beside her, because for the first time in years, someone had reminded her that even broken promises might carry seeds of truth. The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of voices shattered the stillness of the mansion, sharp, clipped, urgent. Lila, still curled in the shawl Clarisse had draped over her shoulders, looked up at the door. Clarisse stiffened. "Stay here," she said, her tone suddenly steel again. But before she could move, the doors swung wide. Evelyn entered first, the lawyer's heels slicing across the wooden floor. Behind her came Amara, Clarisse's younger sister, her eyes blazing, her pearls clattering like warning bells. "What is this?" Amara hissed, pointing at Lila. "Have you lost your mind, Clarisse? Bringing strays into our mother's room?" Lila shrank back, clutching the shawl tighter. Clarisse rose slowly, the photograph of her mother still glinting faintly behind her. "Amara," she said evenly, "watch your words." "No," Amara snapped. "I will not. Do you know what people will say when they find out a gutter child is sleeping under your roof?" You're already the subject of whispers. This will ruin what's left of our family's name." Evelyn added, cool and precise. "She's not wrong. Investors are nervous enough. A scandal about you taking in some street girl? It will spread like wildfire." Clarissa's jaw tightened. "This is my house." "My choice," Amara laughed bitterly. "Your choice? Our mother left us a legacy of dignity, of respect, and you think she'd want that?" She gestured at Lila, wrapped in her shawl, sitting where her own daughter should sit. The words cut like glass. Lila felt them pierce deep, though she didn't fully understand why. She lowered her gaze, cheeks burning with shame she hadn't earned. Clarisse stepped forward, her voice low but thunderous. "Do not speak of dignity to me, Amara. You parade her pearls, her name, but you've forgotten her lesson. She believed in promises. She believed in truth. That girl," her hand pointed toward Lila, steady, "is the only person I've met in years who reminds me of either." For a heartbeat, the room trembled in silence. Amara's lips curled. "Then you've truly lost your way." She turned sharply on her heel, Evelyn following like a shadow, and the doors slammed shut behind them. Clarisse stood there, breathing hard, her mask cracking at last. She looked at Lila, who sat very still, afraid even to move. "I'm sorry you heard that," Clarisse whispered. Her eyes, usually sharp as steel, softened. "My family sees you as a threat, but I see you as a mirror, and sometimes mirrors scare people more than lies ever could." Lila blinked, her small voice trembling. "Do you want me to leave?" Clarisse knelt then, kneeling on the rug before the girl, the shawl between them like a bridge. "No," she said firmly. "Not yet." And for the first time, Lila believed her. The mansion buzzed with unease. Servants whispered in hallways, reporters camped at the gates, and Evelyn's phone seemed glued to her ear, a constant hum of damage control. Lila stayed mostly in the guest room, the heavy curtains drawn, listening to the muffled thunder of voices below, but Clarisse did not hide. For 2 days she paced the marble floors, the ring never leaving her hand. She read and reread her mother's letters. She stared at her reflection in mirrors she had once trusted to show only strength. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw a girl in the rain clutching a ring that wasn't hers and refusing to keep it. On the third morning, Clarisse called Lila to her study. The girl arrived timidly, still unsure if she was wanted. "We're going out," Clarisse said. Lila blinked. "Out? Where?" "To the press." Clarisse's voice was steady, though her hands trembled faintly against the desk. "They've already spun their rumors." "They'll keep spinning unless I speak, and I will not let my silence make a liar of you." Lila's stomach dropped. "But if people know you let me in, won't they be angry?" "They will," Clarisse admitted. "My family most of all. But reputation built on lies is no legacy worth keeping. My mother believed that. Perhaps it's time I do too." By noon, cameras crowded the mansion's front steps. The gates opened, and Clarisse Morgan descended in a simple black dress, her scarf tucked neatly around her shoulders. At her side, half hidden but present, walked Lila. The shouts began immediately. "Mrs. Morgan! Who is the girl? Is it true she stole from you? Why bring her here?" Clarisse raised a hand, and silence surprisingly followed. Her eyes scanned the crowd, cold and commanding, but her voice carried something new, something softer, almost vulnerable. "You want the truth," she said. "Here it is. This girl found my ring in the gutter, a ring that belonged to my mother, a ring I nearly lost because I no longer believed in what it symbolized. She returned it, though she had every reason not to. She proved honest where the world expected deceit." She turned slightly, resting a hand on Lila's shoulder. If that shames me, so be it. If that ruins me, so be it. But know this, I would rather stand beside her honesty than behind all your hollow praise." The crowd murmured, cameras clicking like thunder. Somewhere in the back, Evelyn pinched her temples in disbelief. Amara stood at the edge of the drive, her face pale with fury. But for once, Clarice did not look at them. She looked only at the girl beside her, whose wide eyes glistened not with shame, but with something she had almost forgotten how to feel: pride. And in that moment, Clarice Morgan knew she had crossed a line she would never walk back from. The headlines came fast. "Billionaire defends homeless girl." "Clarice Morgan's ring and redemption." Some sneered, some praised, most gossiped. But Clarice no longer cared. She had spoken the truth, and once it was out, she discovered something remarkable. It no longer frightened her. Days later, in a modest hall far from her marble mansion, she stood at a wooden podium. Reporters filled the rows, but so did teachers, social workers, and children in borrowed clothes. Lila sat in the front, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes wide as if afraid to blink. Clarice placed the ring on the podium, its diamond catching the light. "This ring," she began, "was meant to symbolize promise. I lost faith in it. I nearly threw it away, but a child found it and returned it, not for reward, not for gain, but because she believed in honesty when I did not." She looked toward Lila. The girl's cheeks burned pink, but she didn't look away. "And so," Clarice continued, her voice steadier now, "I have created the Honesty Scholarship. It will provide education, housing, and support for children living without homes. Not charity, opportunity. Because if one girl can remind me of my mother's lessons, then countless others deserve the chance to be heard, to be seen, to be believed." Applause swelled, cameras flashed, but Clarice's eyes found only Lila's. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the echoes of clapping had faded, Lila approached her. She tugged gently at Clarice's sleeve. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why start all this? Because of me." Clarice bent down, her hand brushing the girl's cheek with a tenderness she hadn't allowed herself in years. "Because you showed me that promises aren't dead. That honesty can still live in the world, even if it comes from the gutter."